On a long night when the wind carries the gentle scent of distant forests and allows the world to feel quieter than usual, you are slowly invited to calm yourself while letting your breath settle into a soft rhythm, like the steps of a monk walking through the stone corridors of an old medieval monastery in Europe. You may feel as if you are seated near a small window overlooking a grassy courtyard where moonlight reflects faintly across the damp ground, creating a space that comforts a mind seeking rest. In this descending quiet, a subtle urging appears, encouraging you to open yourself to an ancient tale of a holy figure surrounded by unanswered questions about a body that once burned in a blue glow without any visible flame, a phenomenon that has haunted monastic records for centuries. You might sense the air thickening gently, as though holding memories that never fully vanished, even as time erased the many voices that once echoed between the cold stone walls. And as you allow yourself to relax, you will discover that this tale is not merely a story about strangeness, but a slow journey into the enduring human curiosity about things that lie beyond simple explanations. Let your thoughts follow the story at an unhurried pace, like a small river flowing calmly, as if guiding you into an older layered world that keeps secrets not always meant to be uncovered. In this gentle atmosphere, you are invited to approach the tale without pressure, without haste, letting each detail emerge on its own, while giving your body and mind space to rest. Nothing needs to be pursued. Nothing needs to be forced. Only a soft invitation for you to wander through a mystery that drifts between the pages of ancient codices and the memories of monks who once knelt in the dark, wondering how the body of a saint could burn into blue ash that was too fine to explain. Allow this story to open its door slowly, and you only need to listen while enjoying the quiet of the night that wraps around you with delicate ease. The year that marks the beginning of this story is often mentioned by monastic writers in hushed tones, as though they themselves hesitate to disturb the long slumber of the past, for in the preserved records stored deep within archival rooms it is noted that the event occurred around the 13th century in a damp and cold region of northern Europe, where fog lingered through most seasons. You may imagine the morning atmosphere when monks awoke before sunrise and walked slowly toward the prayer hall carrying small lanterns that cast only a faint glow, and that glow shimmered softly against stone walls coated with thin moss like a green blanket that persisted despite the shifting seasons. Behind their daily routines lay a quiet vigilance. They never confessed openly, especially after reports of a holy body burning suddenly began circulating from one monastery to another, carried by church envoys who traveled long distances through dark forests and small isolated villages. Some writings mention that the strange occurrence did not happen only once, but appeared in similar accounts even when the locations were far apart, creating the suspicion that this phenomenon was not a singular oddity, but part of a pattern unknown yet carefully recorded, allowing us today to sense it as though opening pages still warm from the hands of monks who lived centuries ago. Within this historical atmosphere wrapped in uncertainty, every word in those manuscripts seemed to hold weight, and when you read or imagine them, you are invited to walk through damp corridors of time while hearing faint echoes of footsteps that no longer exist. The monks who recorded the event described that year as a period filled with subtle unease when the air often felt heavier than usual, and the nights stretched longer, as if something beyond understanding waited behind the drifting fog. They dared not draw conclusions, yet they continued writing as though writing was the only way to ensure the world would not forget that something had once taken place, something that caused a blue light to appear silently and left ash so fine it was difficult to believe it had ever been a human body. The location where the event was first recorded is often described as a small monastery standing on a low hill not far from an river that moved gently between dense forests and wet fields that were always covered in mist. You might picture this place as a quiet refuge separated from the noise of the world, where monks lived in a rhythm identical each day, waking before dawn, working in a modest garden, copying manuscripts in a scriptorium lit only by candlelight, then praying in a silence so deep that the steps of a bird outside the walls could be clearly heard. They wrote that the air in the region carried a strong scent of damp earth, especially during winter when rain fell for days and fog hung like a gray curtain that never fully lifted. In this almost constantly moist atmosphere, the monks first reported unusual changes inside the Axella. One brother, a man known for his calm and devoted life. Every record describes the monastery as old, even in that era, with stones that had endured season after season, so their colors blended into greenish grays, as if marked permanently by time. Meanwhile, the inner courtyard remained wet, illuminated only by dim light from a cloud-covered purpurred sky, making the entire place feel as though it existed between the world of waking and the world of sleep. The monks wrote that before the phenomenon occurred, they had sensed something different in the air, a silent presence that did not threaten, but made them pay attention to small details they had long ignored. They heard unfamiliar sounds at night, like faint pops that came from no fire, and no one knew their source. Even so, they continued their routine with quiet acceptance, as if believing their monastery was a space suspended between mystery and the ordinary simplicity of human life. From this calm place emerged the first reports of a body burning in blue light, and from that moment, the location was no longer seen as merely a small hilltop monastery, but as the starting point of a chain of records that eventually filled medieval Europe with whispers of a strange phenomenon that never found a definitive explanation. The historical conditions of that era created a backdrop that made every event feel dense and deeply meaningful. For the early to mid medieval period was known as a time when the people of Europe lived amid layers of uncertainty, from small territorial conflicts and recurring plagues to a profound belief that the physical and spiritual worlds touched each other in subtle, invisible spaces. For the monks who lived in the small monastery atop the hill, such realities were not frightening, but simply part of daily life, accepted without lengthy questioning. You may imagine how they gazed at skies covered by heavy clouds, feeling the cold air penetrate their wool robes, and how every small sound might be interpreted as a sign of something greater. During this period, scientific knowledge was still simple. Medical records were barely developed, and the concept of spontaneous combustion was entirely unknown, even as a theory. So when they found the body of a brother reduced to delicate ash within a glow of blue light, they were compelled to place the event in the spiritual realm, for only that realm offered any explanation, however faint. The monks wrote that everything felt heavier that year, as though a quiet tension settled in the air, and many believed the world was undergoing a trial that could not yet be understood. Meanwhile, other monasteries, hearing the report, sent questions and church envoys to determine whether the incident involved any abnormal element or perhaps a sign that needed interpretation. Scholars of the time were few and most worked under ecclesiastical authority, so documentation relied heavily on direct observation and interpretation, deeply shaped by religious tradition. Any unexplained phenomenon was recorded carefully and reluctantly, as though the writer knew their words might one day fuel debate across centuries. Indeed, the historical atmosphere made every detail feel fragile, yet profound. The monks lived in a world that appeared silent yet full of signs, and when the blue phenomenon occurred, they had no framework except the belief that nature sometimes opened a small door into something beyond comprehension, yet still worthy of being recorded so that future generations could ponder what once unfolded. In the records preserved across several monasteries, the scribes attempted to describe the surroundings of the place where the strange event occurred with details that reveal how deeply the environment shaped their understanding of the world. For them, nature was not merely a physical space, but also a reflection of the spiritual condition of those who lived within it. Some writings mention that the region was often wrapped in thick fog, especially during seasonal transitions when cold air from the north met the rising moisture of marshes and slow-moving rivers at the foot of the hill. The monks wrote of how the fog sometimes grew so dense that only the monastery bell told them the time, while the sun appeared as a pale ring, unable to pierce the gray veil hanging over the air. You might imagine a morning when dew clung to the monks' robes, and their steps left small marks on the wet ground that never seemed to dry. In such conditions, all their senses became more attentive to subtle changes, whether it was a faint burnt scent with no clear source or a soft crackling sound that came from no open flame. They noted that few villagers dared to wander far, for the nearby forest was known as a place where sounds distorted, a phenomenon we may now attribute to the acoustics of a tree-covered valley, but which in their time was seen as a sign that something unseen moved in the dark. The monks living amid such natural conditions regarded every occurrence with contemplation. So when news arose about a saint whose body burned with blue light, they accepted it as a happening aligned with the nature of the region, a place where the boundary between reality and something more elusive felt thinner than elsewhere. The records left by the monks make it clear that this damp, misty, and hushed environment became the natural stage for a mystery they documented carefully, so that later generations might understand the atmosphere surrounding the event not merely as an isolated incident, but as part of a world filled with signs that were difficult to interpret. The day when the event was first noticed by the monks began like any other quiet and misty morning. The brothers rose in silence and moved slowly toward the prayer hall. Yet something in the air felt different, though none of them could clearly identify what had changed. They wrote that the usual damp scent lingering in the stone corridors was accompanied by a faint warmth, as if something had just occurred. In a place still wrapped in fog, you may imagine a young monk responsible for checking each cell, walking past the old wooden doors, observing whether all the brothers had come down for the first prayer, and how his steps halted with hesitation as he approached the cell of an elder monk known for strict discipline, who was never late and always opened. His door, slightly before the bell rang, records indicate that the young monk sensed a silence thicker than usual. Not a peaceful quiet, but a strange pause that made the air feel momentarily still. When he knocked, there was no response, no rustle of cloth, no footsteps, so he chose to push the door, which to his surprise was unlocked. As the door opened, the air inside the cell felt different, warmer than the damp corridor, and from the corner of the room appeared a faint blue glow so soft that it might have gone unnoticed without careful attention. The light did not pulse, did not move, but resembled the lingering trace of something that had only moments before faded away. The records make it clear that the young monk did not immediately understand what he saw. He simply stood there, sensing his own body grow cold despite the room's warmth. The stone floor was covered with a thin layer of pale dust, so fine it stirred at the slightest breath, and at the center of that layer lay a faint outline of a human form no longer present, as though the body had vanished, leaving only a delicate trace and ash, unlike anything produced by ordinary fire. There was no strong smell of burning, no charcoal, no scorch marks on the walls, only the fading blue glow. And a heavy silence, as if the room itself was holding something that could not be explained by ordinary words. The monks later wrote that after standing frozen at the doorway for several moments, the young monk finally called two of his companions, who were passing the corridor carrying morning hymn books. They arrived with hurried steps, yet maintained the quiet discipline of the monastery. And when they saw what lay inside the room, they halted without speaking, as though any word would disturb the delicate balance hanging in the air. Ancient notes describe how the three of them stood almost in a ritual posture, not because they intended to perform a ceremony, but because their bodies felt compelled to remain still so as not to disrupt something they did not yet understand. You may imagine how they stared at the stone floor covered in a layer of fine ash that did not come from wood or cloth, how they searched for patterns or signs that might explain the disappearance of the elderly monk, and how each breath felt too loud within a room that seemed to reject sound. All accounts mention the same thing, that the ash was so soft no footprint was left behind, even when they slowly stepped inside, making them question how something that had once been flesh and bone could leave behind remains that were so evenly spread and delicate. The faint blue glow slowly faded like a reluctant mist that had no strength to stay. Yet none of them felt heat, although the air was warm and there was no source of fire, no fallen candle, no overturned oil lamp, no scorched fabric, only the sense that the room had witnessed something that did not obey the rules of solid or liquid matter. One of the older monks wrote that the warmth of the room was not the warmth of flame, but the warmth of a final exhale, of something that had finished its purpose and now receded, leaving questions hanging in the thick stone air. The silence that followed grew heavier, not frightening, but like a thin blanket covering something too fragile to be touched by human language. On the following morning, when a thin veil of mist still clung between the pillars of the monastery, you returned to walk slowly along the threshold of the corridor that had felt filled with whispers. The night before, even though no one had been seen there, the morning air carried the damp scent of old moss growing between. The stones, along with a faint trace of church incense, normally burned before dawn prayers. You paused for a moment, observing the pale, cold floor that curiously seemed to reflect a bluish tint, as though light had lingered from something you had never witnessed directly. The scribes began to arrive one by one, making almost no sound carrying their sheets of parchment and writing tools while maintaining the silence that served as an unspoken rule of this place. They moved carefully, as if the floor itself held a memory that must not be disturbed. You then entered a small room to the right of the hall where an archive keeper sat hunched over examining brittle pages. He did not turn his head, yet you sensed that he knew you had come to ask about the same signs. That had been the quiet topic of the monastery for several days. On his wooden table rested a small vessel filled with an extremely fine ash, almost like flour dust, yet darker in tone, and when touched, it clung to the skin, as though reluctant to leave. The ash had been collected from the floor of the cell, where an elderly sister had been found a few nights earlier with no flame, no blaze, only remains too delicate to be considered the result of an ordinary fire. You tried to examine the room more closely, noting the cracks in the walls where winter moisture seeped through, and the wooden shelves that held heavy manuscripts, fastened with worn straps. The atmosphere felt heavy, yet calm. A calmness not soothing, but restraining, as if the room was waiting for something to return. The archive keeper finally lifted his face and in a low voice said that whatever had happened to the elderly sister could not be explained through ordinary knowledge, yet he reminded you that history often leaves behind events that can only be understood through patience and long observation. You remained still, sensing a faint tremor in the air, and for a moment you wondered if the mystery you were following was not merely an incident, but a pattern that had been unfolding long before you arrived. As you continued your steps toward the inner courtyard of the monastery, the cold air felt slightly heavier, as though it held particles of time that moved slowly. The sun had not fully risen, leaving only a faint streak behind the tall stone walls, so the light reaching the courtyard appeared pale and fractured by the still wet leaves. You lowered your gaze to observe the trails of water on the stone surface, which seemed to flow in. Patterns not entirely natural, like lines drawn by an unseen hand shaping deliberate curves. The brothers assigned to maintain the courtyard walked slowly, carrying small vessels filled with sacred sand, meant to be scattered over specific areas that ancient records described as places where unusual phenomena often appeared near the winter season. They worked with calm, careful rhythm, as though each grain needed to be placed precisely so the balance of the old space would not be disturbed. At the edge of the courtyard stood an old well with stone walls covered in deep green moss. The water within looked calm, yet it did not reflect your image clearly. Its surface held a thin mist that seemed to rise from the bottom. You noticed a young sister standing near the rim of the well writing notes on a small piece of parchment. She glanced at you briefly, offering a polite nod before returning her gaze to the water with close attention. She explained that whenever a mysterious burning incident occurred in the past, this also showed certain changes. Either the water darkened slightly, or a faint metallic scent emerged from no natural source. You leaned in, trying to sense the aroma she mentioned, and indeed, there was a subtle scent that could not be explained. It was not the sharp smell of metal, but rather the lingering trace of heat hanging in the air after embers fade, even though no fire existed near the well. She then pointed toward the old tree on the northern edge of the courtyard, where dry leaves frequently fell in circular patterns despite the absence of wind. She said the keepers of records considered these signs part of a sequence of symptoms that foretold something larger. You felt a thick silence surrounding the courtyard, and within that quiet, you sensed that the monastery was not only a toe, witness to history, but also a place that responded subtly to something unseen yet steadily approaching. When you stepped out of the courtyard and entered the long corridor that connected the outer area of the monastery with the room used by the daily servants, the atmosphere shifted into a deeper silence, as if every stone in the wall reminded you that this place held more secrets than had ever been written in any book. Morning light entered through narrow windows placed high above, so the beams fell like thin lines cutting through the dimness with softness. You walked slowly following the path of that light while noticing how cold the air became as it passed through the corridor, even colder. Then the air outside, as though drawn from a source deep beneath the ground. The sound of your footsteps echoed clearly and repeatedly, creating the impression that the corridor itself was listening. Soon you reached a small wooden door that served as the entry to the storage room, where kitchen tools were kept and where the brothers typically prepared meals for the monastery. Yet that morning, the room felt unusual. There was no clatter of metal pots, no familiar scent of vegetable broth rising before sunrise. Instead, an almost imperceptible smell of damp charcoal lingered just enough to create a faint tightness in your throat. You saw a young brother lighting a candle while keeping his eyes fixed on the large hearth in the corner. He signaled for you to come closer and pointed to a bluish stain on the upper wall of the hearth, a mark that looked new, yet showed no trace of soot. He explained in a low voice that the bluish mark had appeared on the same night the elderly sister was found reduced to ash. When the brothers attempted to scrub it away, the stain remained as if born from a reaction unknown to human senses. You touched the surface of the bricks and felt a stored warmth within them, even though the hearth had not been used for a long time. It was not ordinary heat, but a subtle vibration radiating from the stone like a memory that refused to fade. The young brother said that many times in the past, the kitchen room had been the place where the first signs appeared before something significant happened, as if the space instinctively responded to an unseen force moving through monastery life. You stood still, absorbing the strangeness, and for a moment sensed that the small room was trying to tell you something in a language formed not from words, but from the quiet residue of events long withheld. After leaving the kitchen, you continued down the narrow hallway, leading to the transcription chamber, a place usually filled with the soft sound of ink brushes touching parchment. Yet that morning, the atmosphere felt denser and quieter than it should. You walked slowly, noting how the stone walls appeared glossy with moisture clinging to them since early dawn. In several places, the stone showed thin streaks, like scratches not created by human tools, but by stretched heat marks, as though an unseen wave had once passed through and etched its presence. The corridor felt warmer than the previous rooms, but it was a dry warmth without a source disappearing the moment you stopped moving. When you reached the door of the transcription room, the chamber looked unusually disturbed. The wooden tables, normally arranged neatly, were slightly shifted, as if the scribes had hurriedly abandoned their work before sunrise. On one of the tables lay a sheet of parchment partially burned, though oddly, the burned section was not black, but a fine blue-gray ash that blended into the wood. You moved closer and touched the edge of the parchment, which then crumbled gently like dust lifted by breath. On the remaining fragment, faint Latin writing describes signs in the sky and unexplained occurrences recorded centuries earlier. The text ended mid-sentence, and you sensed the writer must have rushed to move away before something happened. An elderly scribe who usually guarded the room suddenly appeared from behind a large shelf, stumbling as though he had not slept throughout the night. He looked at you with reddened eyes, then nodded faintly before telling you that the room had felt different the previous night. He had heard a sound like heated whispers, a voice not belonging to any person, but to something moving through the air. He pointed to a corner of the room where the stone floor was slightly paler, as if touched by intense heat without leaving smoke or smell. He said events like this had been recorded in the monastery, as past only appearing when something significant approached, a pattern always connected to what the brothers called burning without flame. You listened closely, and in the silence that followed, you realized that this room held far more secrets than its quiet appearance suggested. You left the transcription chamber with slow steps, as though your body was still adjusting to the erratic temperature shifts within the monastery. The corridor you entered next was longer and darker than the previous one, illuminated only by faint morning light seeping through narrow slits in the ceiling. As you walked, you noticed the air around you shifting gradually from cold to warm and back to cold in irregular intervals like the breath of something unseen. Each step echoed heavily, as if the corridor were made of layered spaces, and each echo suggested that the distance itself changed, though your path remained the same. Along the walls, small symbols were carved thinly, reflecting the monastery, as tradition of marking areas known to have a history of strange occurrences. At first glance, the symbols seemed ordinary, but upon closer inspection, the strokes bore signs of heat, as though exposed to a light too intense to be natural. When you neared the end of the corridor, you heard a faint noise like paper lifted by wind, even though the passage had no windows and remained tightly enclosed. You paused, listening more intently, yet the sound neither approached nor faded, but stayed fixed in one place as if waiting for you. You continued walking and soon reached a small room once used to store weather observations and records of star movements compiled by the monks. The room was filled with wooden shelves holding scrolls, most yellowed and fragile. Yet one scroll lay open on the large table, as if someone had recently read it. You approached and noticed immediately that the center of the scroll had turned pale gray, as though exposed to intense heat, though no burn marks were present. The writing described a strange phenomenon recorded centuries earlier about blue light appearing without a source in several European monasteries, coinciding with events of spontaneous human combustion. The author depicted the light as a gentle shimmer that moved like a breath, leaving behind ashes that could not be explained by the knowledge of that time. When you touched the edge of the scroll, you felt a residue of warmth, though the room itself was cold. You realized that whatever had once happened here had left not only written records, but also traces of energy still pulsing faintly. In that silence, you sensed the subtle impression of an unseen observer watching your movements as though the room itself waited for you to grasp a message that had not yet been fully revealed. After leaving the weather record room, you followed a narrow corridor that sloped gently downward, leading to the deepest section of the monastery, an area rarely entered except by the oldest keepers of the archives. The air in this passage felt different, as if it contained a separate layer of time untouched by the air above. Each breath carried the scent of damp stone and a faint mineral taste reminiscent of natural caves. Light barely reached this place, so you relied on a small lantern hanging from the wall. Its glow swayed gently with your steps, and each movement caused thin shadows to form between the stones, as though the corridor had a pulse of its own. Some parts of the wall bore faint bluish patches barely visible, yet distinct, as if touched by a light not belonging to the ordinary world. At the end of the corridor, you entered a small circular chamber known by the monks as the pulse room, a place described in old records as the center for observing unusual events within the monastery grounds. The room had no windows and no decoration except for thin circles carved into the floor. These circles seemed simple, yet when observed for a longer moment, you sensed a subtle vibration flowing outward from the center toward the walls. The vibration was not strong enough to move your body, but enough to make you aware that something within this space moved slowly beneath the surface. Q stepped into the center of the room and felt a sudden change of temperature, a warmth.
A Q.
That was gentle, not like fire, but like an old energy resting beneath layers of silence. In the corner stood a small stone table with an uneven surface. On it lay a parchment scroll, not burned, yet faded into a bluish tone, as though stored too close to an unseen heat source. You unrolled it carefully and found a brief note about a saint believed to have experienced spontaneous combustion centuries ago. The record did not tell a full story, but described changes in the air around the saint before the event occurred. The writer mentioned a soft blue shimmer, moving like thin mist, and a warmth not produced by any human body. As you read the final line, the scroll trembled slightly, as if touched by a breath of wind, though the chamber was completely sealed. You sensed that the pulse room itself was waiting for something that had not yet fully revealed its shape, and that you now stood at the center of an unfolding pattern older than memory. Leaving the pulse room, you retraced your steps through the narrow corridor, but this time your footsteps felt heavier, as if the stone beneath you remembered something from your presence moments before. When you reached a small junction leading to the lower storage area, a warm draft suddenly brushed past your left side, though there were no vents, no cracks, no structural gaps that could allow air to move. For a moment, you assumed it was merely the lingering sensation from the unusual temperatures in the previous chamber. But the flow was too directed, too intentional, like a quiet greeting from something unseen. You paused, listening. There was no sound except a faint resonance deep within the wall, a low hum like the stone fibers themselves were vibrating. You followed the junction into an older storage section, a place rarely touched even by the archive keepers. The shelves were constructed from aged wood darkened with time, bearing delicate dotted patterns as though mold or moss had once grown there but vanished without a trace. Between the shelves lay stone boxes without marks, no carvings, no inscriptions, no symbols. Yet when your hand approached one of them, you felt a faint pulse, almost like a tiny heartbeat emanating from within the solid stone. You withdrew your hand, uncertain whether it was merely vibration from the floor or something truly alive inside the box. On the lowest shelf, you discovered a small metal cylinder that seemed far more modern than the objects around it. The metal was dark with an unnatural sheen, as though reflecting light that did not exist. When you picked it up, the cylinder was warm, not like metal, chilled by subterranean air. You opened it carefully, finding inside a thin sheet made of a material you could not identify, not paper, not cloth, but something like a delicate membrane that held its shape. Across the surface of the membrane, thin lines appeared like scratches of light, forming shifting patterns whenever you tilted it. When you brought it closer to the lantern, the room's illumination dimmed for a fraction of a second, then returned. You felt a brief pull, a shift in pressure impossible to explain. The luminous pattern on the membrane moved like a slow inhalation, and each inhalation echoed like a distant whisper that held no language you recognized. You lowered the membrane, and even after sealing the cylinder, the impression that the room was observing you did not fade. You realized that the deeper you ventured into the monastery's lower chambers, the clearer it became that this place did not merely store records of the past it stored. Something still alive, though its form of life was nothing you understood. As you stepped out of the old storage area, the corridor ahead looked slightly altered, as though its walls had shifted by a few inches in complete silence. There were no signs of anyone passing through, yet the small fracture patterns on the stone surface looked different from when you had first walked by. You brightened the lantern, and something new came into view. Thin, pale blue lines running along the left side of the corridor, forming a faint trail-like, fading remnants of light. The trail moved downward toward the deeper sections, as if inviting you to follow. You hesitated, but the curiosity awakened within you since entering the pulse room now felt impossible to restrain. You followed the luminous trail, your footsteps slow and careful, listening to every subtle change in the air. The deeper you descended, the temperature shifted again, not warm this time, but cool in a way that felt almost soothing, like being near a distant stream. The blue trail grew fainter, yet never disappeared completely, providing just enough glow for you to catch glimpses of thin shadows moving in the corners of your vision. But each time you stopped to observe them, they vanished, as if they only existed when you weren't thinking about them. The corridor eventually opened into an oval-shaped chamber, larger than the pulse room, but not as tall. Its walls were covered in very old carvings that resembled a mixture of star patterns and interconnected energy pathways. The carvings emitted a soft glow knot from your lantern, but from themselves an organic light that seemed to follow a slow rhythm, like breathing. In the center of the chamber stood a large stone resembling an altar, though lacking any religious symbols. Its surface was flat, smooth, and slightly warm to the touch. As your hand brushed the stone, the carvings on the walls responded. Their light pulsed gently, brightening and dimming as though acknowledging your presence. The pulse traveled around the chamber, following the star path carvings. A faint electric tingle crawled from your fingertips up your arm, not painful, but distinctly real. It felt like recognition, as though the room was trying to remember something about you. Then, without warning, a thin strand of blue light appeared above the altar, swirling slowly into a small circle. The light came from nowhere, not the carvings, but from the air itself, as if awakening something long dormant. You stared at it, sensing that whatever was about to happen next was part of a pattern that began long before your arrival. The blue light hovering above the altar slowly began to stretch, like a thin thread pulled from invisible air. You noticed how it vibrated with a gentle rhythm, not the heartbeat of a living creature, but something far older and more concealed. The room remained silent, yet beneath that silence, you sensed another kind of sound. Soft resonance, not heard with ears, but perceived through the body, like a slow wave of pressure moving from the walls toward the center. You stood still, letting your body adjust to the nearly imperceptible shift while keeping your distance. For the blue light seemed delicate and yet dangerous in a way you could not fully understand. As the thin light extended, it began forming a circular pattern in the air, as though guided by an unseen hand. The pattern strangely resembled the ancient carvings on the walls, though far more intricate and fluid in its movement. You watched the lines of light spiral, cross, then merge again, forming a large circle that slowly turned. From that circle drifted tiny sparks, falling like glowing dust. When they touched the floor, a faint whisper sounded, not in any language you knew, yet unmistakably tied to the history of this place. You stepped closer, cautiously, feeling the air warm again, but in a more controlled way, as if the room itself ensured the heat would not cause harm. The circle of light then began to thicken, not into a physical object, but into something like a memory taking shape. A faint shadow appeared at its center, the silhouette of a human figure, though not fully defined. It was not made of flesh and bone, but of thin mist, illuminated from within by a silver-blue glow. The figure stood with its hands held together before its chest, motionless like a statue carved from light. A gentle tremor moved through the floor, not frightening, but reminiscent of something awakening from a long sleep. It felt as though the room was presenting to you the first stage of something far larger. The blue radiance around the silhouette pulsed softly like breath. And a quiet impression entered your thoughts, suggesting that this figure was not merely an echo of the past, but a message waiting to be understood. The glowing mist figure remained motionless, yet the longer you observed it, the more you sensed that its stillness was not inactivity, but a form of communication ancient and exceedingly slow, as though the entity spoke not with sound, but with a calmness that flowed outward into the room and eventually into you. The blue light surrounding it gradually thickened and began to drip like a liquid that did not obey gravity, flowing both upward and downward at the same time. You watched the droplets of light form tiny patterns in the air, patterns strikingly similar to the ancient symbols you had seen in the upper archive room, especially those connected to accounts of medieval spontaneous combustion phenomena. The chamber pulsed again. This second pulse was stronger, but still gentle, like a guardian tapping lightly on a door so as not to startle its occupant. The pulse caused the luminous circle around the mist figure to tremble, and from this trembling emerged additional shadows, like reflections of events attempting to manifest but revealing only fragments. You glimpsed the outline of a wooden chair, a small stone table, and something resembling a torch, though not one that burned with red or orange fire. Its flame was instead a deep blue glow, like heated metal, radiating invisible heat. As you studied the shadows, the mist figure slowly raised its right hand. The movement was deliberate and unmistakable, as though it wished to show you something. Its hand, formed entirely of light, pointed toward an empty section of the chamber wall, a spot that held no carvings, no markings, just plain stone. But as you continued looking, a thin line appeared there, like a tiny crack illuminated from within. The line did not break the stone, but seemed to open a thin layer, covering something hidden. You approached cautiously, sensing another shift in the room. The air grew heavier, not oppressive, but laden with information you could not yet decipher. The glowing line widened slowly, forming a narrow slit that revealed stone of a different tone beneath, bluish as though exposed to immense heat without being scorched. A faint scent drifted out, a mixture of the monk's old ceremonial oils and something unfamiliar, like the residue of a combustion that left no flame behind. The figure continued, pointing toward the slit. Then its surrounding light flickered once, as if signaling that whatever lay behind that opening was the core of the mystery the monastery had kept hidden for centuries. The glowing slit widened gradually, not from any physical force, but as though responding to your presence. The thin layer that had once resembled a crack now unfolded more clearly, creating a stream of light tracing its edges. The stone revealed behind the opening seemed far older than the rest of the chamber. Its texture, smooth like metal that had been buried for centuries but never rusted. Its bluish hue radiated a sense of impossible heat, as if the wall had once absorbed temperatures no ordinary fire could produce, something more ancient and more profound than natural physics. As you stepped closer, a cold draft drifted out from the slit, yet its chill was unlike night air or the cold of underground halls. This cold carried the sensation of a memory-on echo of something experienced long ago that brushed against your skin like a fragmented message. The faint scent of monastic oils grew stronger, now mixed with an unfamiliar trace, something akin to minerals heated far beyond any human-made threshold. Behind you, the mist figure began to shift, not fading, but expanding. Its blue glow unfolded like petals opening in slow motion. Faint lines resembling ancient script appeared on its surface, moving to the rhythm of its pulsating light. The script belonged to no language you recognized, yet its cadence felt like a prayer whispered for hundreds of years. A subtle vibration joined the air, causing the floor beneath your feet to feel as though it were breathing. The slit widened further, just enough for you to glimpse a small hidden chamber beyond it. A concentrated beam of deep blue light emanated from within, stronger and more stable than the glow of the mist figure. The light appeared to come from an object, perhaps a container set at the exact center of the concealed room. Its shape remained indistinct, veiled by a thin layer of mist that closely resembled the being behind you, as though the two shared an ancient link surpassing the monastery's recorded history. Without uttering a sound, the glowing figure inclined its head as if granting permission or issuing a warning. The pulsing light throughout the chamber softened, settling into a steady quiet, signaling that whatever lay beyond the opening was now waiting for you to decide your next step. You stared at the opening a little longer, trying to determine whether the light emanating from the hidden chamber was an invitation or a warning. Slowly, the thin mist surrounding the object within began to rotate, forming a clockwise spiral. At first, the movement was nearly imperceptible, but within seconds, its rotation grew steadier, as though responding to the rhythm of your own heartbeat. At the same time, the main chamber behind you emitted a faint sound, not metal, not stone, but a low-frequency hum reminiscent of a prayer trapped for centuries within enclosed walls. You stepped closer. The air near the slit shifted temperature in an impossible manner. The right side of your body felt warm, like it was brushed by candlelight, while the left side felt as cold as the marble floors of ancient cathedrals. The opposing sensations did not clash. Instead, they merged into a strange equilibrium that made you feel as though you stood on the threshold of something that defied all human understanding. The glowing object in the small hidden room now revealed more of its shape. You could see its edges, circular like an ancient metal cylinder, yet its surface showed no signs of oxidation or age. It looked newly forged, despite the atmosphere around it, suggesting it had remained here for a span of time beyond measure. The surface emitted a soft blue light, not blinding, but observant, like the steady gaze of someone evaluating whether you were worthy of what lay inside. As you leaned forward to get a better view, the mist surrounding the object drifted aside, creating an opening. In an instant, the blue light inside the small chamber pulsed once a subtle yet forceful enough pulse to send a soft resonance through the main chamber, as if the stone walls themselves acknowledged your presence and responded to it. Behind you, the glowing mist figure remained motionless, but its radiance grew slightly brighter, as though it were holding its breath. You realized then that whatever lay beyond the slit was no mere object or artifact. It felt like the core of a collective memory, the nucleus of a narrative spanning hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. And now, whether by courage or accident, you were the one standing before it, the one about to witness what the outside world had never been permitted to know. The blue light from the hidden chamber grew steadier, slowly forming a thin circle on the floor, as though marking an invisible boundary, separating your world from something far older than any known language. As you stood at its edge, you felt a faint vibration climb through the soles of your feet, my vibration not born of the earth, but of some ancient mechanism that impossibly still functioned without sound, without power, and without anything resembling physics as you understood it. The circle warmed slightly, not with scorching heat, but with the warmth of a creature drawing its first breath after a centuries-long slumber. Leaning farther in, you could now see the interior of the glowing metal cylinder. The center looked empty, yet not empty. Watery film shimmered, reflecting blue light across the small chamber's walls. Behind that layer, small flickers appeared, tiny sparks that resembled neither red flame nor yellow fire, but something like pure energy, a chemical or elemental process that required no fuel and no oxygen. Each flicker seemed to contain a miniature shadow, as if holding a microscopic record of events too small for the human eye to truly interpret. As you observed more closely, one flicker suddenly accelerated, stretching into a thin line that extended toward the cylinder's surface. The line seemed to be attempting to project something, perhaps an image, perhaps a fragment of memory. And for a fraction of a second, you saw it. The silhouette of a person sitting in the same wooden chair you had glimpsed in the earlier tremor. The figure was hunched forward, hands resting upon a small stone table, and from the body radiated an intense blue glow, the same glow that now filled this chamber. You could not see the face, but the posture suggested no suffering, only a strange serenity. As though the figure had long prepared for the transformation unfolding around them. The air around them shimmered, and you heard a very faint sound, almost like the whisper of paper sliding gently against itself. You realized then that the cylinder held not just energy or unexplained natural phenomena, held the record of a life. The life of the individual at the center of the spontaneous combustion legend. Within the cylinder lay everything. The final moments, the shifting air, the instant in which human and light merged into a single event that had never been understood. And now, for the first time, the cylinder seemed ready to reveal the entire story to you. The light within the cylinder began to move like the slow spiral of a river current, forming a gentle vortex that rose a few inches before descending again like a heavy mist, struggling to understand its own shape. You noticed how the flow created an imperfect circular pattern, as though the energy inside was searching for the correct pathway to release information that had been held in suspension for centuries. With each rotation came a faint sound, barely distinguishable from the natural hush of the chamber. Yet gradually you recognized that the sound carried a subtle rhythm reminiscent of a person breathing in a state of deep calm. The pattern produced a silence so profound that the entire room felt as though it had paused, waiting for something to fully emerge. As the vortex reached a certain intensity, the inner walls of the cylinder shifted to a deeper shade of blue, almost black, yet still carrying a soft sheen that moved from one edge to the other. This sheen revealed a new layer that had been invisible before, a thin network of horizontal lines that resembled organic structures but were composed entirely of light. These lines vibrated softly, then drifted toward the center of the cylinder, forming a more stable circular formation. From this formation emerged a shadow growing clearer with each pulse, radiating from the core as though attempting to reveal its identity while still bound by the limitations of its stored energy. The next moment arrived so gently that you almost missed it. The shadow developed into the silhouette of a man wearing a monk's long robe, standing with his body slightly bent, as if examining a small object before him. This silhouette differed from the earlier image of a seated figure. Now the figure appeared alive, moving slowly, even giving the impression of acknowledging your presence. It felt as though he looked directly through the cylinder toward you. Despite being nothing more than an energy imprint lacking full awareness. Yet there was something in the tilt of his head, a subtle human gesture, like a person suddenly sensing they are no longer alone. Around the silhouette, the blue light intensified, forming a wavering halo. You detected a slight shift in the air, like the faint change before a minor storm, though it remained gentle enough to keep your body relaxed. The light flickered twice, then revealed a clearer detail. It now appeared that the figure was holding a small piece of parchment, strikingly similar to the ancient note you found in the pulse room. Slowly, you understood that you were witnessing a recorded fragment of the final moments before the phenomenon of spontaneous combustion occurred. A moment preserved only as legend for hundreds of years. The light surrounding the monk's silhouette began to tremble gently, like an energetic body preparing to reveal the next layer of a story long locked within the cylinder. You watched as the blue glow, once still, transformed into soft waves that spread from the figure's chest across the chamber, creating the illusion that the stone walls vibrated in the same rhythm. This wave of light was not blinding, but held a depth that demanded your full attention. As though missing even a single movement would cause a crucial part of the event to slip back into the unseen folds of time. Within the swirl of light, the monk's hand holding the parchment grew clearer. You could see the movement of his fingers, slow yet deliberate, as if he were tracing something on the surface of the parchment that was not written in ink. Each touch produced a tiny spark, like a chemical reaction requiring no oxygen. These sparks rose into the air, forming thin lines that drifted gracefully, creating patterns that reminded you of the carved circles on the floor of the pulse room. The pattern swirled, then accelerated, merging into one another until they formed a kind of sketch. A rough outline resembling the layout of a chamber you had never encountered anywhere in the monastery. The monk's silhouette then turned its head slightly to the right. A small but meaningful gesture, as if noticing something that existed beyond the boundaries of this recording. At that same moment, the air around you grew warmer, as though someone stood close beside you, though no presence could be seen. This warmth did not come from the cylinder, but from the air itself, as if an old memory had awakened and was echoing through the atmosphere, replaying the sensations preserved within the light. Then the glow around the monk expanded slightly, revealing new details previously hidden. Behind him appeared a small wooden shelf containing objects too vague to identify, except for one rounded item emitting faint blue radiance, like an ember that refused to die. You began to understand that this object might be the core of the mystery, an artifact or substance capable of altering human energy in ways never recorded in any scientific document. The light around the rounded object flickered, and you felt a soft pressure in your chest, as if the room itself nudged you to look closer, as though, at this very moment, the long-hidden truth was beginning to unveil itself with greater honesty. As the light around the rounded object sent out another series of delicate ripples, you felt the floor beneath your feet tremble faintly. Like a response from an ancient structure, finally acknowledging something long neglected. The vibration was subtle, yet strong enough to loosen dust from the corners of the chamber, sending the tiny particles drifting into the air, joining the shifting rhythms of the blue glow. In an instant, the entire atmosphere of the room resembled a transitional space, a thin, unseen border between what had once happened and what was still waiting to be revealed. The monk's silhouette seemed to stretch, its lines of light elongating as though his body was no longer bound by gravity or the familiar dimensions of physical form. Through the shifting gaps of brightness, you glimpsed something unexpected. fragmentary visual memories, fleeting scenes, moving too quickly to catch fully, yet clear enough to suggest that this recording did not capture a single moment, but instead held layered sequences of lived experience, as though someone had attempted to store time itself in stacked layers of light. Then the monk's hand moved no longer toward the parchment, but toward the empty space before him. His gesture was slow, deliberate, reminiscent of someone drawing a pattern across the surface of still water. When his finger traced the final arc of a complete circle, the air in front of him trembled, and a slim vertical streak of blue appeared, stretching from the stone floor to the height of his chest. The line thickened, condensed, forming something like a door, yet lacking hinges, edges, or any physical mechanism familiar to you. As the door-shaped form stabilized, the ambiance of the chamber shifted dramatically. A pressure gathered in your ears, similar to the sensation of climbing rapidly into higher altitude. Light from the newly formed door poured outward, casting fresh shadows across the room, shadows that did not follow the logic of the light's direction. They moved independently, like fragments of other memories trying to break free from the recording, attempting to signal that whatever lay behind this luminous threshold did not belong solely to the past, but perhaps awaited a moment to reconnect with the present world. Then a faint sound emerged, as if the stone walls themselves exhaled. The sound carried no words, yet its meaning penetrated directly into your body, that the door was no longer part of the old recording, but something forming no and invitation or a warning, one you could not yet distinguish. You gazed at the luminous door with a mix of awe and caution, feeling as if every fiber of your body began adjusting to the energy radiating from it. The air surrounding it trembled subtly, carrying a faint aroma of aged incense blended with warm metal, causing your sense of smell to recognize something simultaneously familiar and foreign. Once again, you realized that this space was not merely an energy laboratory or ancient archive. It was a living medium, capable of transmitting experiences, memories, and secrets long buried within human and spiritual history. The monk's silhouette remained near the glowing cylinder, yet his movements had slowed, grown calmer, as if aware that you had perceived a fragment of the pattern recorded within the cylinder. His form was no longer static blue light, but pulsed gently in the rhythm of preserved breaths, like an energy recording mimicking real life. Each vibration caused subtle ripples around the rounded object, like the surface of water disturbed by an invisible hand. These ripples reflected delicate shadows across the walls, presenting faint images of the environment around the cylinder, including wooden shelves, dust-covered floors, and crevices that only appeared when your lantern had cast light upon them. Then, gradually, from the slit of the blue door emerged the vague form of another monk. Smaller in scale, seemingly bent over a miniature desk, writing something. The figure moved slowly, yet each motion was clear and deliberate, as if it wanted to reveal the final seconds before the spontaneous combustion phenomenon occurred. You felt as if you could follow every movement of the hands and head, sensing the aura surrounding him, the scent of incense, and the warmth emanating from his body. This moment was so delicate that even a blink might cause part of the pattern to dissolve back into hidden time. The light vortex around the cylinder then pulsed slightly faster, sending soft waves down to your feet. The waves carried a strange sensation, like memories brushing against your body, conveying information without words, instilling the awareness that what you were witnessing was not merely a reconstruction of the past, but a living representation of an event that continued to exist, though invisible to ordinary human eyes. Every element, light, scent, ripple, shadow, and energy united to form a complete narrative, a multisensory experience surpassing written history and standing as witness to a mystery that for centuries had been known only in whispered legend. The blue waves emanating from the cylinder and door focused increasingly on the central area, as if there were a core of energy seeking to communicate with you. You realized that your position in this chamber was no accident. Every step, every breath seemed aligned with the flow of energy. The air around you felt denser, not oppressive, but filled with information waiting to be deciphered by your senses. At that moment, you began to feel a subtle tingling at your fingertips, as if the swirling energy were brushing, marking, or even inviting your participation in the ongoing process. The monk's silhouette near the cylinder remained still, yet there was a palpable presence in his subtle movements. The light surrounding his body spread slowly, forming ever-changing circular patterns that adjusted to a rhythm understandable only by calm and focused awareness. These patterns resembled a language you had never known, an energy code attempting to be interpreted by your very senses. Each circle of light sent a gentle warmth through your body, soothing yet demanding attention focused on the core of the phenomenon. Then, the second figure emerging from the slit of the blue door became more distinct. The writing on his miniature desk appeared to shift constantly, glowing letters appearing and disappearing with the movement of his hands. The light from the writing merged with the surrounding waves around the cylinder, creating the illusion that the entire room had become a living organism, where all elements, light, shadow, scent, energy intertwined and influenced one another. You felt a faint sense of another presence, as if a hidden consciousness lay beneath the waves of light, waiting to be acknowledged. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching, and you began to perceive fragments of recorded history, overlapping shadows of monks, incense lingering in the air, and blue light flowing like veins of energy. Together, these elements formed a multi-sensory narrative beyond the reach of sight or sound alone. You realized that what you were witnessing was a living record, not mere history, but a spiritual experience locked in pure energy. The mysteries of spontaneous combustion, the blue glow, and the ancient notes now appeared as a single whole, gradually revealing themselves to you in a manner that defied simple explanation. Amid the swirling light and ever-shifting energy, you began to notice details that had previously remained hidden. Fine dust in the air seemed to dance to the rhythm of the blue wave shadows on the walls, formed patterns that seemed to provide directional hints, and the scent of incense mingled with the warmth radiating from the cylinder, creating a feeling both familiar and alien. This sensation affected more than just your sight or smell. Your entire body responded to subtle vibrations that seemed to summon the deepest layers of consciousness to engage in the experience. You realized that this room was not merely a physical space, but a medium connecting the real world with a living layer of historical energy. The monk's silhouette near the cylinder grew more tangible, every detail of his robe and hand movements visible, yet retaining a luminous quality that distinguished it from ordinary physical presence. As he bent over the parchment, you understood that the blue light emanating from him was not merely a visual phenomenon, but carried information in subtle vibrations, a language of energy penetrating consciousness without words. Each movement of his hand created delicate ripples in the air, interacting with the glow around the rounded object, forming new patterns previously unseen, like layers of notes stacked upon one another. Gradually, the space around the cylinder appeared to transform into a multi-dimensional field, where shadow, light, scent, and energy merged into a living whole. You began to recognize that the second monk figure, emerging from the slit of the blue door, was adding a new chronological layer. Each motion marked the sequence of events leading up to the spontaneous combustion phenomenon. The details of his hand movements, gaze direction, and finger pressure on the parchment conveyed information never recorded in any document, yet stored energetically. You gazed at the rotating, layered patterns of light and realized that what you were witnessing was a multisensory recording of the past, yet alive in the form of energy. Each blue shimmer, ripple of light, and moving shadow offered new insights into the mystery of spontaneous combustion, into the unexplainable energy potential of the human body, and into the connection between human consciousness and supernatural phenomena observed by medieval monks. This room, with all its vibrations, lights, and layered aromas, now felt like an open, living book, inviting you to read and feel each layer of history hidden within it. The blue light surrounding the cylinder and door thickened and swirled faster, like a vortex of energy forming intricate patterns in the air. You felt each rotation as a subtle pulse reaching deep into your chest, as if the room were attempting to channel a deeper understanding of the phenomenon directly into your body. Shadows on the walls shifted with the light's patterns, yet not randomly. They formed images of sequences, fragmented time, and critical moments preceding the saint's spontaneous combustion. Each shadow seemed to carry its own meaning, waiting for you to decipher the messages contained within. The first monk remained near the cylinder, yet his radiance no longer spread aimlessly. It formed energy pathways connecting the cylinder, the rounded object, and the blue door. You realized these paths resembled an energy map, marking the crucial points at the center of the phenomenon. Each spark of light, each gentle wave, appeared as a word in a secret language, understandable only through your presence and full attention. This sensation was not merely seeing, but feeling the energy structures that preserved historical records, compelling you to connect with a living history. The second monk, emerging from the slit of the blue door, now moved more distinctly within his energetic recording. His motions marked the sequence of rituals and actions performed before the spontaneous combustion, including how he held the parchment, how his body adapted to the surrounding energy, and even the intensity of the light emanating from him. Each detail seemed like a fragment of code that, if comprehended, could explain how human energy might transform into a physical phenomenon, mysterious and unexplainable by either medieval or modern science. You felt a subtle pull from the rotating energy in the chamber, as if the room wanted you to step closer to become part of the forming pattern. Once again, the scent of incense, the gentle warmth, and the blue light fused into a multi-sensory experience that bordered on the mystical, yet remained observable and recordable. You understood that what you were witnessing was not merely a recording of the past, but a living experience and energy reconstruction, allowing insight into the patterns, rhythm, and intensity of a phenomenon previously only hinted at in ancient notes. With each turn of the light, each wave of energy, and every shadow that emerged, you began to grasp the complexity of the mystery. It was not only about a saint's spontaneous combustion, but also about the interplay of energy, consciousness, and the spatial medium that had preserved this experience for centuries. The chamber, the cylinder, and the monk figures now felt like an organic whole, waiting to be fully understood by an attentive and open consciousness. The swirling blue light in the chamber began to emit a softer intensity, as if inviting you to observe every movement and change with greater attentiveness. You realized that the patterns formed were not merely visual, but a language of energy conveying the story, emotions and processes experienced by the saint's body before the spontaneous combustion. Each rotation of the light produced subtle ripples in the air, and those ripples adhered to your senses, creating a warmth unlike ordinary fire. You felt vibrations that seemed to penetrate layers of consciousness, instilling an intuitive understanding beyond what words could describe. The first monk's silhouette remained near the cylinder, but his movements now appeared slower and imbued with meaning. Each sweep of his hand and glance regulated the rhythm of the blue light. It's as if he were a conductor guiding energy to unveil hidden layers of information. The glow surrounding the rounded object danced with his gentle movements, forming patterns reminiscent of the ancient records you had previously read, including symbols associated with spontaneous combustion phenomena. These patterns provided new insights, revealing the connection between body posture, energy, intensity, and environmental changes that had never been documented scientifically. The second monk from the slit of the blue door began adding more complex motions. He bent over, wrote, and occasionally gazed at points in the air that appeared empty to the ordinary eye. Yet, with energy-sensitive perception, you recognized that these points marked the flow of energy capable of triggering changes in the human body. Patterns neatly preserved in the room's energetic archive. The scent of incense, combined with the warmth of the blue light, deepened the experience, making you aware that you are not merely a passive observer, but part of the intuitive reconstruction of the phenomenon. The waves of light spread further, casting subtle shadows across the walls, floor, and ceiling, creating a multi-dimensional space seemingly beyond the physical confines of the monastery. You realized that every movement, every blue shimmer, and every ripple of energy formed part of a living narrative encompassing history, spirituality, and the interaction of humans with natural phenomena that defy explanation. This chamber, with all its complexity and rhythm, now appeared as a living network awaiting full comprehension, and you stood at its center, both witness and participant in a mystery preserved for centuries. You began to realize that the blue light and swirling energy were not merely visual phenomena, but a living record connecting the past with your present consciousness. Every moving wave, every spark of light, and every formed shadow represented fragments of information signaling the dynamics of the saint's body before the spontaneous combustion. You felt the energy reflecting in the air, interacting with objects in the chamber, and even producing subtle physical sensations in your hands and face. This experience made you feel as if you were part of the historical process itself, not just a passive observer of an event that occurred long ago. The first monk's silhouette appeared more alive, each movement of his hand creating ripples of blue light that spread across the room. The pattern of these ripples seemed to convey information about timing, intensity, and critical points before the combustion phenomenon. You could sense that he was rewriting ancient records, not with ink or parchment, but with energy that clung to the air and stone surfaces around him. Each sweep of his hand carried a distinct nuance, transmitting messages only receivable by a consciousness truly calm and sensitive to subtle vibrations of energy. The second monk, emerging from the slit of the blue door, began moving in harmony with the energy waves, marking the sequence of rituals and motions that might have triggered extraordinary changes in the saint's body. The blue light emanating from him merged with the primary swirl of light, creating an energy harmony that allowed you to absorb information intuitively. The mingling scent of incense and the warmth of the energy deepened the experience, making the entire chamber feel alive, filled with unwritten records awaiting interpretation by a conscious and open observer. Over time, you sensed subtle shifts in the flow of energy, as if the chamber adjusted itself to your presence. You began to understand the patterns of interaction between light, shadow, objects, and scent. All of it forming a multisensory narrative reconstructing the spontaneous combustion event from the perspective of energy. This chamber was not merely a physical space. It had become a living medium, allowing you to experience history as a tangible reality, compelling you to comprehend, feel, and honor a mystery preserved for centuries. As you stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the swirling blue light and shifting energy, your consciousness began to merge with the flow of the unfolding phenomenon. The waves of light rotated slowly, yet consistently, forming patterns more intricate than before, as if revealing the relationships between every element in the room: the monk figures, the cylinder, the rounded object, shadows, and the faint scent of incense. You realized that every detail, no matter how small, played a role in this energetic narrative. Even the tiniest ripple on the stone surfaces or the subtle movement of shadows seemed to contain information linking the past with your present experience. The first monk's silhouette leaned slightly forward, his hands moving through the air as if writing invisible code. The blue glow around the parchment intensified, forming delicate lines that floated and connected with each other, weaving a story absent from any written document. The second monk, emerging from the slit of the blue door, now moved more dynamically, yet gracefully, following the rhythm of the primary energy. Every gesture emphasized critical moments before the spontaneous combustion phenomenon, providing you with an intuitive understanding of the sequence of events, cause and effect, and the energy patterns peaking at the critical point. The chamber now felt like a living organism. Air, light, energy, shadow, and scent fused into a single entity that continually interacted with your consciousness. You realized that this space served not only to record events, but also to reinterpret the phenomenon through energy patterns that could be felt. Every breath carried a gentle warmth, signaling that you were at the intersection of the physical world and an energy layer preserved for centuries. The sensation was not frightening. It was soothing, as if the history and mystery of the room were inviting you to participate in a rhythm both slow and gentle. As the blue light gradually faded, the energy patterns began to adjust to the emerging calm. Shadows on the walls and stone surfaces diminished in intensity, while the scent of incense lingered softly, leaving a subtle yet tangible trace of memory. You understood that this experience was not merely a visual or sensory reconstruction, but a journey to the core of a phenomenon uniting humans, energy, and space in a mysterious harmony. It was at that moment you realized that the mystery of spontaneous combustion was not solely about fire or ashes, but about an energy that transcended its physical and scientific understanding, and you had become a witness to the deepest layer of a story long concealed. As the blue light faded and the energy waves began to calm, your attention turned to the slit in the blue wall that had previously been overlooked. Behind it, a layer of stone appeared different, softly bluish and faintly shimmering, as if holding energy that had been restrained for centuries. You felt a subtle pull, as though something beyond that surface wanted to be acknowledged, revealed slowly rather than forced. With careful steps, you approached the slit and peered closely. The energy that had once flowed wildly now moved steadily, like a calm river waiting to be read by perceptive senses. The scent of incense mingled with the warmth of the blue glow, reinforcing the sensation that you were not merely an observer, but part of a medium that stored and interpreted this phenomenon. Gradually, the light patterns enveloping the chamber appeared to form a network of memory connecting the monk figures, the cylinder, and the rounded object with the bluish stone behind the slit. You realized that this layer might be the key to explaining the energy flows before and after the spontaneous combustion. Every shadow on the wall, every ripple of light, even the slightest gust of air seemed to hold messages awaiting translation by a watchful eye and a calm mind. An ancient consciousness was hidden behind that bluish stone, a presence that had observed centuries of this phenomenon without interfering or judging. Leaning closer, the energy around you adjusted itself. The previously wild waves of light now formed clearer, repeating patterns, marking sequences of events, temperature changes, and light intensities that could be crucial clues to understanding spontaneous combustion. The warmth penetrating your skin was no longer merely a side effect of the energy, but seemed to guide you in comprehending the rhythm and internal laws of the phenomenon. In that moment, you realized that the long-hidden mystery was not only a physical occurrence, but an interaction between energy, space, and human consciousness, perceptible, studyable, and honorably observed through attentive observation. The chamber grew ever quieter. Every detail seemed magnified by your own awareness, allowing you to absorb each energy fragment carefully. You began to see that the bluish stone layer, the wall slit, and the monk's auras were not separate elements, but part of a single organic system interpreting and preserving this mysterious history. The mystery no longer felt distant. It was here, waiting to be fully experienced by anyone with patience, meticulousness, and an open consciousness. In the stillness of the chamber, you began to notice subtle patterns appearing on the surface of the bluish stone behind the slit. The patterns did not resemble carvings or human-made symbols. They moved and shifted with the waves of energy around them, as if alive and responding to your presence. Each luminous line flowed slowly, sometimes branching into several directions before merging again, conveying messages only perceptible to highly sensitive senses. You realized that this energy was not mere light, but a form of language enabling comprehension of the rhythm and dynamics of events preceding and following the spontaneous combustion. The subtle pull from these patterns pressed gently against your chest, guiding your attention to every small detail that might otherwise be overlooked if observed superficially. The first monk's silhouette seemed to add delicate movements to the blue light, as if reinforcing the information stored within the bluish stone. Each sweep of his hand generated waves that enveloped the slit, reflected shadows onto the walls, and altered the light's intensity around the rounded object. You could sense a complex interaction between the monk's body energy, the light-emitting object, and the bluish stone layer. This realization offered a new understanding. The phenomenon of spontaneous combustion was not a sudden event, but an accumulation of structured energy, orchestrated by the space, objects, and human awareness present at the time. The second monk, emerging from the slit of the blue door, introduced a new rhythm to the energy pattern. His movements were slower, yet seemingly more significant. He marked key points in the air, revealing connections between the energy in his body, the blue light, and the bluish stone layer. You recognized that this stone layer functioned as a medium for storing energy memory, preserving fragments of events that could not be translated through written records. The mingling scent of incense, the gentle warmth of the blue light, and the subtle vibrations in the air reinforced the understanding that you were touching the core of a mystery safeguarded for centuries. As you observed these interactions, the energy patterns in the chamber began to form a clearer narrative, revealing the sequence of events, the peak points of energy, intensity, and the moment where spontaneous combustion was triggered. This chamber did not merely record history, it reinterpreted it through energy that could be felt. You realized that understanding this phenomenon required patience, full attention, and a consciousness fully present. The mystery once hidden was now beginning to offer clues, gradually revealing the deepest layers of the saint's story and the energy enveloping his body before the invisible flame emerged. As you stared longer at the layer of bluish stone, the movement of the surrounding light patterns grew increasingly rhythmic, like a slow, repeated breath. The patterns seemed to form an invisible diagram of energy flows that had once passed through the saint's body before the spontaneous combustion occurred. You felt a gentle pressure in your chest and back, as if the chamber were guiding your consciousness to align with the rhythm of this energy. The faint scent of incense now felt deeper, mingling with the warmth of the blue light, which neither burned nor faded, creating a multi-sensory experience difficult to describe in words. The first monk's silhouette now bowed his head, his hands moving slowly along the streams of blue light shaping patterns in the air. Each sweep of his hand appeared to affirm fragments of history stored in the room's energy, making the shadows on the walls depict the sequence of events more clearly. you realized that the ripples of light and movement of shadows were not mere reflections, but representations of energy carrying precise information about timing, location, and intensity of the phenomenon preceding the spontaneous combustion. This sensation made you feel as if you were part of the chamber itself, interacting with history through a living, energetic medium. The second monk, emerging from the slit of the blue door, moved his hands more gently, marking key points in the air that indicated critical energy shifts in the saint's body. The blue light from his figure merged with the main swirl, forming harmonious patterns that seemed to guide you in understanding the structure of this complex energy. Each movement emphasized that the phenomenon was not merely about fire or physical matter, but about the interaction between energy, space, and human consciousness, perceptible, observable, and experienced through full attention and calm awareness. As the energy patterns became clearer, you began to understand that the bluish stone layer, the wall slit, and the monk's auras were all components of a larger organic system, a system that had preserved centuries of experience. The chamber now felt alive, not merely a physical space, but a medium connecting past and present through energy directly perceivable. The mystery of spontaneous combustion, once seemingly inexplicable, gradually revealed itself as a multidimensional phenomenon involving consciousness, energy, and spatial medium as a unified whole. This experience made you realize that understanding the mystery required patience, calmness, and fully present observation, allowing every detail of the energy to be read and appreciated. As the blue energy in the chamber began weaving more complex patterns, you realized that each line of light and shadow was not merely a visualization, but an emotional recording embedded within the medium. The room seemed to breathe slowly, exhaling past experiences into the air, blending the rhythm of the monk's movements with the energy retained in the bluish stone. You could sense the care and diligence of the monks as they recorded and interpreted this phenomenon. How their consciousness appeared to merge with the saint's bodily energy, which eventually transformed into the event of spontaneous combustion. The scent of incense mingled with the warmth of the blue light, sharpening your senses and allowing you to perceive patterns that had previously been faint. The first monk now leaned toward the cylinder, his left hand moving through the air, tracing paths that reflected the blue light. Each motion generated waves spreading across the chamber walls, merging shadows and light into a slow yet information-rich dance. You realized that this phenomenon could not be separated from the room itself. The chamber's energy, the light patterns, and the monk's bodily movements were intertwined within a harmonious system preserving memory and the sequence of events. Each wave of light seemed to have its own intensity and frequency, marking critical moments preceding the saint's transformation into fine ash that defied explanation. The second monk's silhouette moved closer to the bluish stone layer, his hand pointing to a faintly glowing line. The light around him adjusted to his movement, forming an energy pathway connecting the cylinder, the rounded object, and the point on the wall. You realized that the bluish stone acted as an extremely sensitive energy repository, recording every shift, every spark flowing through the human body and its surrounding medium. With full awareness, you began reading these patterns not merely as visual shapes, but as an implicit experience, teaching the relationship between energy, consciousness, and space. As your attention deepened, the chamber grew quiet, yet filled with significance. Every subtle detail of the energy patterns guided you to understand the sequence of events, the interaction between body, objects, and energy medium, and the peak point where spontaneous combustion began. The mystery that once seemed distant was now present before you, gentle and calming, like a story told slowly to be received and felt rather than forcibly mastered. This experience made you realize that understanding this mystery is a process of immersing in energy, rhythm, and consciousness rather than merely seeking a physical answer. You began to realize that every object in the chamber played a role in the entirety of this phenomenon. The cylinder at the center, the rounded object emitting blue light, the layer of stone behind the slit, and even the seemingly simple blue door all interacted in a complex dance of energy. Each movement, each spark of light, carried its own information, which, when combined, formed a complete energetic narrative, as if the chamber itself were an open book about a mystery preserved for centuries. You felt the presence of time differently here. Past and present seemed to converge within the energy medium, perceivable through both senses and consciousness. The first monk appeared to focus intently on the cylinder and the rounded object. His hand movements flowed in harmony with the swirling blue light, forming patterns marking changes in the saint's bodily energy. Each tiny spark of blue light resembled a notation in a language only understandable through calm, fully present observation. You realized that the phenomenon of spontaneous combustion was not merely about a burning body, but about energy patterns stored and interacting with the room, objects, and human consciousness present at the time. The second monk, moving around the slit of the blue door, seemed to add rhythmic detail to the already formed pattern. His gestures emphasized key points within the energy, demonstrating how the flow of human energy could be influenced by the spatial medium and surrounding objects. You felt the warmth of the blue light enveloping the two monks, and how this energy appeared to resonate with your own presence, making you feel as if you were part of the emerging pattern. This experience expanded your awareness, extending beyond physical observation into a subtler realm of energy, rich with information. As the energy patterns became clearer, you began to perceive the underlying order of the phenomenon. There was no chaos, only subtle structures guiding each element: light, shadow, objects, and monks' bodies into a harmonious system. Every element seemed to have its reason for being where it was, and you felt that to truly understand the phenomenon, one must be fully present, absorbing the rhythm, interactions, and relationships of the stored energies. The mystery of spontaneous combustion was no longer merely a past event. It had become a living experience, connecting human consciousness with energy and spatial medium, and you were now both witness and participant in this unfolding process. As you watched the vortex of energy become more distinct, you began to recognize subtle patterns connecting the cylinder, the rounded object, and the slit in the blue wall. Each spark of blue light seemed like a word in an ancient language, and each wave emanating from the monks' bodies resembled sentences forming a hidden narrative. You felt that this experience was not merely a visualization, but a direct interaction. between your consciousness and the stored energy. The chamber became a medium of slow and gentle communication, speaking through light, motion, and subtle rhythm, inviting you to comprehend the essence of a phenomenon long hidden from the outside world. The first monk moved slowly, his hand tracing the glowing blue air, emphasizing specific points within the energy pattern. Each movement seemed to recalibrate the room's rhythm, aligning the old energy with your present awareness. The blue light radiating from the cylinder and the rounded object pulsed in synchrony with the monk's hand movements, creating patterns that could not only be seen, but also felt through intuition and emotion. You realized this was an energetic language that could not be written, only understood through full attention and patient stillness. The second monk's silhouette added a new layer to the pattern, linking energy points in the wall slit with the swirling light around the cylinder. Each motion revealed relationships previously hidden between the medium, the bodies, and the phenomenon of spontaneous combustion. You felt the gentle warmth of the blue energy permeating the chamber, enveloping you in sensations inexplicable by science, but comprehensible through your senses and awareness. The room now felt alive, preserving and displaying historical energy organically, guiding every observer present to read and feel the sequence of complex events. As you stood within the center of the energy pattern, your awareness grew sharper. Every detail, from the smallest wave of light to sparks floating in the air, seemed to carry implicit meaning. The mystery of spontaneous combustion was not solely about fire or ash, but about the consciousness involved, the energy flowing, and the medium preserving centuries of experience. You realized that fully understanding this phenomenon required calmness, patience, and openness, allowing each layer of energy to be sensed, analyzed, and appreciated. The experience left a quiet sense of awe, as if the lingering secret patiently awaited comprehension through gentle, attentive observation. You stood at the center of the swirling blue energy, feeling each wave and spark interact with your consciousness. The chamber seemed to stretch beyond its physical boundaries, as if you were in a dimension where past, present, and potential futures converged. The first and second monks moved with perfect calm, as though time for them flowed more slowly, allowing every gesture, every spark of energy to be recorded in meticulous detail. You realized that spontaneous combustion was not merely a physical event, but a manifestation of a complex interaction between energy, consciousness, and a medium capable of preserving experience across centuries. The light patterns rotating in the air now formed an energetic architecture that could be read like an open book, revealing sequences, intensities, and critical points preceding the transformation of the body into fine ash. You felt a gentle pull from this energy, as though the chamber invited you to immerse yourself fully in the unfolding experience. Each layer of blue light imparted lessons that could not be explained by ordinary logic. A subtle language spoke through the energy, connecting you to the monk's consciousness, to the saint's body, and to the medium preserving this history. The silence of the chamber was not emptiness, but space for you to absorb the experience slowly. Every scent of incense, every warmth radiating from the blue light, and every subtle vibration guided your awareness to the heart of the phenomenon. You understood that truly delving into this mystery required calm, full presence, and respect for the energy stored over centuries. There was no rush, no answers forced upon you. Only observation and acceptance allowed the energy patterns to be fully read and felt. As you gazed upon the two monks within this energetic recording, a gentle melancholy arose, as if they understood that this experience was not to be possessed, but to be witnessed and comprehended slowly. The mystery long preserved by this chamber gradually unfolded before you, yet it retained its untouched beauty, comforting softness, and secrets that could only be felt. You realized that understanding this phenomenon was not about answering every question, but about being fully present, absorbing the rhythm of the energy, and allowing yourself to connect with layers of history, consciousness, and eternal mystery. As you slowly left the swirling blue energy and stepped out of the pulse room, a gentle presence seemed to follow every step you took. The air once again carried the scent of damp stone and faint incense, yet you realized that the space had left its mark on your consciousness, like a story still whispering between layers of time. The remaining blue light in the corners glimmered like tiny stars, unwilling to fade, and you felt a soft warmth clinging to your skin, as though the ancient energy wished to remain, even as you returned to the real world. The mystery you witnessed hung in the air, unresolved. Yet the silence and tranquility it left made your heart feel content, though questions lingered. The sky above the monastery faded into the colors of twilight, and the long shadows of stone walls seemed to dance slowly across the wet ground. Each step you took toward the exit brought a sense of wonder and calm, as if the monastery itself wished to ensure that what you experienced was not merely a vision, but a feeling imprinted in your soul. You understood that the phenomenon of the saint's spontaneous combustion, the monk's records, and the swirling blue energy in the pulse room were parts of a mystery not meant to be fully solved. They were secrets guiding humans to be present, to feel, and to absorb a wonder greater than words could explain. As the heavy wooden door closed slowly behind you, there was an awareness that the night would bring peace and quiet, as if the energy of the pulse room still whispered through the air. You glanced back one last time, seeing the faint blue glow fade within the stone crevice, and felt a gentle calm, like a story told slowly before sleep. The mystery remained, yet it had become a comforting companion rather than an oppressive force. You knew that this experience would live on in your memory, leaving a delicate trace upon your heart, teaching that not all secrets need to be solved, and that beauty lies in the ability to be present and feel the wonder surrounding us. In that quiet, you closed your eyes for a moment, letting the energy, the light, and the monastery's magic linger within you, floating softly between dream and reality.